Hello and welcome to my demonstration and hopefully modeling of how you can do decorations on a longboard using a photo transfer technique. The photo transfer technique involves taking a printout of a graphic, and this is just a normal printout on any printer. I use a laser printer. I'm told it also works with inkjet printer, and we're actually going to transfer this image onto the wood. So this looks like it's just been stuck on, but actually there's no more paper left. It's just an image. We've actually transferred the image completely onto the wood, and how that's done is what I want to explain and demonstrate. And I'm quite happy with the results, and this is actually going to be the first board that I do. For a design, I found on the internet some paisley patterns, and I'm actually going to tape a whole bunch of these together and transfer them onto a longboard. And I thought I'd film myself as I do it. The basic principle is that you take the image and you print it out in mirror format. So if you want text to be read the right way, you print it out in mirror format. You paint with a certain medium onto the wood. So you can use, I've discovered you can use wood glue, you can use, most people recommend using an acrylic gel or an acrylic medium, but I actually discovered you can use any paint. It works with any paint. Of course, if you use a red paint, you get the red coming through where you have white on your paper, and the effect is really, really cool. Here I used an acrylic gel, and so you just get the wood coming through. So what happens is you put your medium down, you put your image face down on that, smooth everything out, and leave that overnight to dry. I think it's a good idea to leave it at least 12 hours to dry in a warm room. And then the next day, unfortunately, you can't just peel it off. That would be great. You actually have to wet the paper and rub it off. And it's quite a tricky process. Things can go wrong. But if you're really patient, you can get an awesome, awesome effect, a very professional effect. And I hope that I'm going to get that professional effect. Of course, if you do make mistakes, so a mistake means rubbing too much at the end, which you'll see later, you might take away too much. You can correct that, of course, with a marker pen. I'm hoping that I don't make too many mistakes. So what I'm going to do now is actually take my printouts, which I printed out as big as possible so as to have as little overlap as possible. I've got actually A3 paper, and these all join together to form one big 1 meter long 40-inch longboard, as I am very badly demonstrating here. So the first thing I'm going to do is basically tape these guys together so that we can paint the board and put the stuff down. That'll be the first step. So enjoy watching. Right, and after 5 minutes work, what you are left with is a nice looking design. You have to make sure, and I showed it in my previous video, when you print them out, there is a thing called cut marks. I don't know if you can see that there. There's a cut mark there. That's where you need to cut the paper, so there's absolutely no overlap. And then on the back, you just tape them together again. There's no overlap. I've got about a micrometer of overlap there, but it's there or thereabouts. So we've got our design. And the next task is to get the medium down. So this is the board in question, and my customers asked me to do it in a turquoise blue. So I'm going to be mixing yellow, blue and a bit of white, and I'm going to do a bit of a gradient on this board. I haven't prepped it in any way, it's been sanded, but basically what you need to be looking at, especially since this is an unprepared board, you need to get quite a bit of paint down. You need a very wet surface that we're going to put this design down on, and so that it really transfers the wetness of the paint. And I'm using acrylic paints. I've never tried this with any oil-based paints. I'm a big fan of acrylic paints. The good thing about the acrylic paint is the water in the paint actually soaks into the paper and takes that toner on. Yeah, so basically we're going to paint the board now, stick the paper down, smooth out all the crinkles and wrinkles, and then we're done. And in the morning we can continue and do the really hard work. So let's get cracking. Right, that was a pretty good example of why you shouldn't mix your paint on the board. That was a bit of a fiasco getting the board painted. I've never actually tried to mix light blue before, so it ended up way too dark and I had to go over and over again. Anyway, you saw that I eventually got some sort of blue color. Because there was far too much paint, it's all come through on the other side, so I got a big cleanup job to do. And that's also one of the reasons why you should probably decorate before cutting a longboard. Even if you do a really good job, it tends to run around the sides. But one nice thing is the board's looking pretty good. I've got hardly any bubbles. I spent a lot of time getting the bubbles out. One issue is the seams. So I've noticed there's a ridge here, and I'm guessing we're not going to get the design down there. And another thing which happened to me is I managed to get paint on my fingers and then I got it on top of the board. That's quite bad because this now makes the paper really difficult to get off. We're going to wet this paper now and start rubbing it off, and I'm guessing here it's going to be quite difficult to get off. So this process is actually a very, very long process. I'm going to start right now. As you can see, I'm in a bathroom. I've got a tap running here. I actually need to get some warm water because it works better with warm water. And we're going to start wetting the wetting the paper and rubbing it off. And as we rub off, we're going to get all sorts of little paper rolls going on, and we need to just keep washing those away with water. I think I'm going to also have to take off this sticky tape because that's obviously going to stop the paper coming off properly. Remember, we don't want to peel back the paper at all. We actually want to melt it away effectively, and that leaves the design on the board. So I'm just going to pause for a second while I take off the sticky tape. I think that's quite uninteresting, and I think it has to be done quite carefully, and then we'll get right into the rubbing process. Okay, so let's begin the process of removing the paper. Get everything nice and wet. And you can already see the design is showing through. We let that sit for a little bit and then we begin rubbing very carefully. I'm going to start in the middle where I'm probably going to have drop through cuts anyway, just to get a feel for how gentle I need to be. If I make a mistake at this point, it's not so important. You can see it's rubbing away wonderfully. The first layer of paper, at least the paper I use, the laser paper I use, comes off really nicely, and you don't have to be very careful at all. And what I do is I tend to do this layer all in one go, and then once it's dried, come back and do the next layer. The next layer is quite tricky. So as you can see, I'm just gently rubbing, and the first layer is coming off very nicely. If it starts to get too dry, just pour some more water over it, or splash or spray some water over it. I've never really had a problem with too much water, but in theory, if you get too much water, everything starts to get soggy, even the design. But it's actually looking pretty cool. Hope you can see that. It's really looking awesome. Now, when it dries, it's going to be completely white again. It's just because it's wet that we can see the design here. But then we're going to take off the second layer, and it should be a whole lot less white when it dries. And at that point, when it's dry, we've got as much as we can get off, it's time to varnish it, to take some lacquer and go over it, and then we should get a beautiful effect. I must admit, it's looking good so far. So I'm going to do this in a time-lapse mode, and hopefully in 10 or 20 minutes I should have the first layer off. So that took, I don't know, about 10 minutes or so, and it went surprisingly quick. I must say this, I found that I could rub really hard. Just to get that first layer off, I could really rub quite carelessly, and it came off nicely. I wouldn't recommend doing that with the next layer. The next layer needs a lot of time. But it came out really nicely. Now it's still wet, and it looks awesome. When it dries, it's not going to look awesome, but we'll talk about that later. One thing which definitely did happen, and I knew that was going to happen, was that the seam has not set properly. So the paper was lifted up from the paint and it didn't glue down properly. The good thing about using a black and white design is that you can just go back and correct it with a marker pen, and especially if you use an intricate design like this, it's probably not going to get noticed. Now at this point you might be tempted to start rubbing, because you'll see it as it dries, the black is going to turn grey or white. and you might be tempted to start rubbing. Now, when you do that very carefully. I'm actually going very carefully over this here, and even if I push a little bit hard, the black, the toner starts to come off, and then you get these gaps. Now again, this design allows me to correct that sort of thing with a marker pen, but it's better to just not get into the problem in the first place, obviously. So the next stage is going to be doing the next layer. As I say, it's a very delicate layer. And once you have that off, you should just have toner on the board. It won't be 100% perfect. I mean, if you want to spend 10 hours doing it, maybe you'll get it perfect. I'm going to spend probably another hour doing this, waiting for it to dry, seeing where the really white patches are. And when I've got it to a state that I'm kind of happy with, we'll have another look. And then we can talk about putting some varnish on. All right, see you later. Right, it took also a bit less time than I thought to get the second layer off. The problem with the second layer is you can't see it so well, so you probably think you've got everything off, and once it starts to dry you'll see you haven't. But this board is looking amazing in my opinion. I built a lot of longboards and I've never built one that had this level of definition on the design, and it's probably going to be my best looking board. So what I'm going to do now is just turn on the hairdryer, and then you can see as it dries that it's going to not look so awesome anymore. So I'm not sure how apparent that is, but you can probably see the difference between the bottom wet area and the top area. It's starting to show patches of white. And there is really the last stage of work, is going very carefully with some spray, like a light spray of water, and getting that off. I think it makes sense to do the work and get that off because you will see it at the end when the varnish is on. But as I say, it's as much work as you want to do. You could in theory varnish now and it would look pretty good. But I'm going to go ahead and let this whole board dry now, and then I'm going to go back for a third run, get rid of the paper, and then we're basically ready to sand the edges and varnish the whole thing. Right, so after one or two iterations you get down to the point where the board actually looks pretty good, and there's just very few individual areas that need seeing to. I'm not sure why this doesn't want to focus. There we go. So we've got a little area here. You just dip your finger in some water, rub over it really gently, and you should be getting the fibers off. And then just take some paper towel and dry that away. Now there's always a danger of overdoing it a little bit, and then you start to lose some ink. But as long as you're getting little fibers coming off, it's probably worth it to keep going. Just don't push too hard, and you should get, I don't know, 99% of it off. Now when you go to varnish it, that'll actually, most of it will disappear. But it's really good to get as much as you can off as possible, because once you varnish, there's no more, you can't go back and get it off. It's underneath the varnish then. So now we're basically going to let this dry, and then we're ready to varnish it, and it should come out looking even better than it does now. Right, here we are. moment of truth. The board has been cleared of paper as best I can, so 99%. I've re-drilled the holes, re-sanded the edges, and it's actually looking amazing. I've never seen a transfer come out like this so far, and it should actually look better once we put the clear coat on. So you can, oh dear. I actually went back with a marker pen and corrected some things, and that is now running. Ooh, that's really bad. Okay. Make sure you use a waterproof marker. I think I didn't use a waterproof marker. So we'll have to tread lightly here, because everywhere I put marker it's just going to smudge away. This is a water-based clear coat. It has a lot of advantages in terms of cleaning your brushes, but as we see, some disadvantages, although an oil-based one would have probably done the same. I used the wrong marker pen. Beginner's mistake. Yeah, it's all washing away that marker that I used. So I'm not sure that you can see the difference from there, but from here you can. You can see a whole glossy area covering a matte area. And so this won't be the only layer of varnish or clear coat that we do. I usually do 5 or 6 on my boards, cover all the rails, the top. The top doesn't need so many because it gets grip tape on top. But the bottom I would do 5 or 6 coats because they're very, very, very thin coats. I'm guessing if you use a spray gun it might be thicker. I like to go for lots of thin coats. Bit of a hair there. Always got to get rid of hairs. And that looks pretty amazing. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Reply or comment and show your friends. I think it's an amazing way to do longboards. You can hardly get a professional result like this on your own unless you're a gifted artist, and it works really, really well, and I've never seen anyone using it for longboards, so tell your friends.